So Alex, would you share with us what are you doing now? They had a wonderful Unrigged Summit that brought us all together in New Orleans. What comes next? Where are the big fights? How can people plug in?
Sure.
Take it away.
Thanks, Jeff. For those of you who are not familiar with Represent Us, we are a national nonpartisan nonprofit. We focus on helping our members across the country pass anti-corruption acts, comprehensive anti-corruption acts at the city and state level. We are focused really on the city and state level because even though we're a national group, and I'm going to provide some national perspective from my point of view, we know that the localities are where it's at. That's why we're all here. That's where the power is built, and that's really what matters to start with, especially on such a big issue like this one. As Jeff mentioned, a lot of the focus right now for us is once a lot of the ballot measures, and we focus in a big way on ballot measures, have qualified for the ballot, we are working to help our members across the country, our hundreds of thousands of volunteers and chapter leaders, to plug into all of the available options so they can get involved this November and get involved and build an inclusive movement. So from a national perspective, I brought some numbers because I think numbers are real helpful, and I brought a crib sheet because I'm not so good with them. But I think that when I read these out, you'll see and feel what we're looking at for a new age of democracy reform. In 2012, we're just talking on the state level right now, there were 5 ballot measures that made the ballot in different states on democracy reform issues. That's money in politics, voting rights, voting process reform like ranked choice voting, gerrymandering, and more. In 2014, there were 9, 5 to 9. In 2016, there were 12. And in 2018, there are already 16 qualified, and it looks like 4 more are headed. That's really a movement on the rise, and 2 of those 20 have already won. Ohio passed gerrymander reform at 75%, and as Maria just mentioned, the Maine voters passed ranked choice voting for the first time ever used in the statewide ballot just a few weeks ago. Where I want to touch on the numbers, this is where it's really impressive, but I also want to use this opportunity to give a shout out to all of the groups out there in these different states that are passing these reforms, that are doing the hard work to put this on the ballot. So in Maine, when they passed ranked choice voting, they needed 61,000 signatures to fight the legislature and keep ranked choice voting back on the ballot. They collected 77,000 in just 90 days. In South Dakota and North Dakota, Represent Us chapters, Represent South Dakota collected 50,000 when they needed 27,000 signatures, and North Dakotans for Public Integrity collected 38,000 when they needed 27. There are 4 measures headed to the ballot through voter-collected signatures on gerrymandering. In Utah, Better Boundaries Utah needed 115,000, and they collected almost 200. In Ohio, the Fair Districts Equals Fair Elections Coalition collected a full 200,000 signatures, which forced the legislature to compromise and put this on the ballot so that they could take the vote to the people right in the June primary. That passed with 75% of the vote. In Missouri, where Clean Missouri is working on a gerrymandering, transparency, and lobbyist restrictions measure, they needed 160,000, and they blew it out of the water with 347,000 signatures collected. And anyone who's run these knows you always have to collect more. You don't need to collect twice as much. That shows power. And in Michigan, this is incredible. The Voters Not Politicians group, which is, of course, there are lots of groups working on each of these, and I'm calling out the ballot committee just to give some local flavor here. They needed 315,000, and a really, really volunteer impressive effort collected 425,000. Finally, in Florida, the Florida Rights Restoration Coalition, which is collecting signatures to ensure that returning citizens who have served their time in the criminal justice system can vote. Florida is a huge state, needed 766,000. They collected and just turned in 1.1 million. And of course, you know about Massachusetts. The People Govern Not Money needed 65,000 for their first round and turned in 85,000. And they're buttoning it up for July 4th, right? To turn in those next 11, and then in Wyoming promises preparing collecting signatures for next year. So you put those all together, you think of over 2 million people have signed these signatures. You're going to allow tens and tens and tens of millions of people to vote directly on these important issues. And there's lots of problems with the ballot measure, but when we think about such an entrenched problem, this is really one of the most important ways to solve it. So I'm going to quickly run through the last thing that I want to focus on. And that's that this movement is building the big tent that's necessary to win. That's because it's post-partisan. When we see a state like Ohio, which is an intensely partisan state, split pretty 50-50, voting 75% to end gerrymandering. That's incredible. When we see all of these groups putting together and breaking down the silos that were previously in the reform community, it's not just money in politics, people working on money in politics, or ethics folks working on ethics or gerrymandering. We're all helping each other. That is incredible. And then the last thing, and I think where we can do a lot more work in terms of inclusivity, is making sure that for all of you that flew here, that decided and have been working on this, I assume money in politics is one of your primary issues, maybe not, maybe your first one. But there are a lot of people out there that care about other issues, whether they're criminal justice reform, the environment, subsidies, anything, and helping those folks see how spending 10% of their time on this issue that's the way we're going to build this movement, so that we can collect the signatures necessary, we can build and bring everyone to the table and end up showing the politicians who are, in the end, we're going to need to pass the 28th Amendment, that the citizens care across everyone. If you're not wealthy, then you're affected by this issue. Thanks.
Great.